In the heart of Los Angeles, Griffith Park has had a history of paranormal activity going back well over 150 years. And this video will be the first time anyone has gone on location to each of its haunted hotspots. So let's take a journey. Hey, welcome back to Wild Card Journeys. I'm your host, Eric, and on this channel, I hit the road to make videos about the paranormal, the metaphysical, and various urban legends. So if that sounds like your kind of traveling, then by all means, please consider subscribing. Now, at close to 4,300 acres, Griffith Park is California's second largest state park and the largest municipal park in the country. But over the years, strange reports have come out of the park about everything ranging from the howls of animals late at night from a long-abandoned zoo, to an apparition of a woman in white, to a haunted merry-go-round and picnic table. Legend has it, it all began with a curse. Now, many say the park's paranormal activity stems from a curse that was placed on this land back in 1863. Up until then, it had been owned by a very wealthy man named Don Antonio Feliz. He lived here with his sister Soledad and her blind 17-year-old daughter, Dona Petranilla. Don Feliz was dying of smallpox, and while on his deathbed, his will had been revised, leaving everything he owned to one of his neighbors, a man named Don Antonio Coronel. Now, the ethics and legalities behind how Coronel gained Feliz's consent were questionable to say the least, given that Soledad was bequeathed only a few pieces of furniture, and her daughter was left nothing at all. A furious Dona Petranilla placed a rather lengthy curse on all those involved in this transaction, to include Don Coronel, his attorney, the judge presiding the case, the livestock, and the very land itself, swearing that the wrath of heaven and the vengeance of hell shall fall upon this place. Now, whether or not you believe that the curse is real, what cannot be disputed is that for 30 years following these events, everyone who either owned this land or had any kind of financial stake in it had the worst luck you could imagine, beginning with Don Coronel's widow. She had remarried and lost everything he had left her in a very nasty divorce. After her, a man named C.V. Howard was shot and killed in a saloon on the very day he had sold the water rights to this land for a small fortune. After Howard, another man named Leon Lucky Baldwin opened up a ranch and a dairy here, but his luck didn't last. His cattle died of disease, fire destroyed his grain, and grasshoppers ate his crops. He went bankrupt, sold the land, and was rumored to have been shot by banditos in Mexico sometime later. After Howard, a man named Thomas Bell owned it for a while until he eventually sold it to the man who would be the final owner of this land. Now, Bell lived well into his 80s, but the circumstances surrounding his death were clouded. He either fell off a banister in his mansion on his own, or he was pushed off by his mistress, depending which story you want to believe. Now, the man who would be the final owner of this land and the park's namesake was not without controversy himself, and he happens to be standing right over here. Griffith J. Griffith, a former journalist who made his fortune in silver mining and real estate, purchased the land in 1882. 2 years later, a massive lightning storm brought down huge stands of trees, sending a wall of water cascading through the canyons, during which ranch hands reported seeing the ghost of Don Antonio Feliz, the land's original owner, riding the floodwaters and laughing all the way through. In 1891, Griffith foreclosed on an ostrich farm owned by a man named Frank Burkett. Distraught over losing his farm, Burkett attempted to kill Griffith with a shotgun, and believing he had done so, then took his own life with a revolver. Griffith survived this attempt on his life and retained ownership of the land for several years, although it's been said he never ventured out here at night, only during the daylight hours. Eventually, after years of natural and financial disasters associated with ownership of the land, on December 16, 1896, Griffith J. Griffith donated just over 3,000 acres to the city of Los Angeles, plus an additional 1,000 acres not long afterwards. The only stipulation he gave the city council was, and I quote, "It must be made a place of rest and relaxation for the masses, a resort for the rank and file, for the plain people." But his troubles did not end with donating the land. Griffith, a devout Protestant, believed that his wife, who was Catholic, was not only trying to poison him, but was involved in a conspiracy with the Pope to steal his fortune. This belief eventually led him to serving a 2-year prison sentence after a failed attempt to kill his wife at a hotel in Santa Monica. After his release from prison, the city of Los Angeles cut all official ties with him. Griffith J. Griffith, this land's final owner, passed away in 1919 and was laid to rest at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. And there are still those who say you have not seen the last of the original owners of this land, Don Antonio Feliz and Dona Petranilla. In fact, some will tell you can see them right up the road. The old Paco Filas adobe, or as it's more commonly known, the Crystal Springs Ranger Station. This is the oldest standing structure in Griffith Park, and it's also one of 2 locations people have reported seeing the ghost of Dona Petranilla, either from inside the adobe looking out the window on dark and rainy nights, or on the grounds wearing white, occasionally on horseback. Now, as for the second location where people claim to see her likeness, well, I'll leave that up to you to decide, and it happens to be right up there. The B-Rock hiking trail is one of the most popular trails in the park, and the prevailing legend is that it's one location where both Don Antonio Feliz and Dona Petranilla can still be seen to this day. The ghost of Don Feliz has been seen riding on horseback through these canyons, and as for her, well, on a somewhat larger scale. Now, depending on your vantage point, it's been said that the profile of Dona Petranilla can be seen in the mountain. I looked around, I didn't find it, but if you come up here and see it, please let me know. Also, I like to think that if they can see her like that, at rest, and Don Feliz riding his horse through the canyons, maybe it's because they feel the land has finally returned to them, and they're at peace. I hope so. Now, that's the story of Dona Petranilla, but it's not the only one to come out of these mountains. Let me share with you 3 more that just might be true. The Griffith Park merry-go-round was built in 1926 by the Spillman Engineering Company and originally operated in San Diego until it was moved here in 1937. A man named Luis Alvarado, who had been given the title of Honorary Mayor of Griffith Park by former LA Mayor Richard Riordan, claimed to have an unsettling experience here not just once, but on 2 separate occasions. And it took place right over here. It happened one evening when he was checking to ensure all of the park's visitors had left by sunset. He watched as a man walked down these steps and disappeared. At first he thought he may have stepped behind a tree, but when he looked around he couldn't find a trace of him at all. Mr. Alvarado became truly unsettled when he witnessed the exact same scene repeat itself here just a few nights later, again with no evidence of where the man went. Now, to me, this has the traits of what's known as a residual haunting, where the spirit, or at least the image of the spirit, is stuck in a loop, endlessly repeating its actions. Now, our next story takes us even further back to the park's history, and it just happens to be right down the road. The old Los Angeles Zoo. Opened from 1912 to 1965 until it moved to its new location just 2 miles north of here. Coincidentally, it was built on the site of the ostrich farm Griffith J. Griffith foreclosed on, which led to the attempt on his life. In its day, it held everything from bears to lions to monkeys to elephants, among other kinds of animals, and their growls could be heard throughout the canyon, day or night. But the zoo was constantly criticized for being underfinanced, poorly designed, and inadequate to house the type and number of animals it did. During World War I, they lost the authorization to feed beef to their meat-eating animals and had to resort to feeding them horse meat. This led to many of the animals ending up either malnourished or dying. And to this day, it's been said you can still hear growls emanating throughout the canyon from this long abandoned zoo, day or night. Now let's move on to our final story. Picnic table number 29, quite possibly the park's most well-known urban legend. And this legend has its origin on Halloween night 1976, when a young couple were making love on top of the picnic table. The tree next to it fell over and crushed them both. They died that night. November 7th, exactly 1 week later, park employee Morris Carl was tasked with cutting up the tree and removing it. And that's when something strange started to happen. park employee, Morris Carl, took his chainsaw and cut off the crown of the tree right here. And that's when he reported the strange events began. He felt a sudden, intense cold envelop him. He said it was like catching the flu instantly. And as he started to walk away, the tree itself, he said, began to move. Not just move, but move up and down, slamming itself on the table as if it was angry. Now, if this wasn't enough, he also heard a voice tell him, "Leave us alone." So he did what anyone would do, and he left him alone. So for the following month, he endured endless jokes from his supervisor, a man named Dennis Higgs, about being afraid to come up here and take down this tree. It finally got to the point where they made a bet that Mr. Higgs couldn't come up here himself and do it. Dennis Higgs took him up on his bet, came up here that night with his chainsaw, and it was the last time anyone saw him alive. He was found the very next morning by a jogger, right here, dead, with his chainsaw laying next to him, bent in a U shape. Now, the official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but at first, police suspected foul play because of the injuries to his hand and that his fingernails were broken after being dragged nearly 15 feet towards the table. But again, the official cause of death was a heart attack. Now, while researching this, I came across a unique fact and a very unique theory about what took place here. Fact, this tree has been laying here in this spot for 42 years, and it hasn't rotted at all. If anything, the leaves are green, you have pine cones. But what I find most curious is directly in the center, you have this green shrub growing straight up, smaller little flowers on the outside of it, very healthy, almost kind of pretty actually. And then there's a very unique theory about what took place. In the paranormal community, there is a term called spirit brood. Essentially what that is a spirit brood is when more than one ghost, apparition, specter, whatever you want to call it, a group of them feed off human energy. They work together. And there's two classifications of a spirit brood, roaming and bound. A roaming spirit brood will follow the person they're feeding on, or individuals they're feeding on. A bound spirit brood is fixated on one location. So, for instance, if the person they're feeding on happens to leave, that brood will go dormant until such time as they may be disturbed. One thing I wanted to point out with this video, a lot of people have hiked up here, filmed videos where they sit on the table, lean on the tree, and various other things. I'm not going to. We actually both have gone out of our way not to disturb the tree or the table or touch it in any manner. It's just a personal belief for both of us. Whenever I go to a potentially haunted location or a location that has the potential to be harmful on a psychic level, I have certain measures I take to prepare, and that's only part of it. When I'm on the site itself, when I'm on location, I'm just very cognizant of where I step, what I touch, what I pick up. It's ultimately, especially in a location like this where two people have died, it's ultimately about being respectful to what had happened here.
Or the tree, don't touch the tree.
Exactly. There were a couple times we accidentally brushed against it, but we were, again, it was an accident and we were very respectful. It's a very interesting story. She just talks my ear off.
Cut it.
And there you have it, the origin of the Curse of Griffith Park. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like or comment below, share it with a friend, or better yet, hit subscribe and you can catch all of my videos as I hit the road for the paranormal, the metaphysical, urban legends, or just the open road. Thank you again, join me again, and we'll see you on the journey. It's all in this area.
I know. Okay. Now we're dark.
Well, Mexican, you're Puerto Rican. Nothing we can really get on it,
What?
Yeah. She chats so much, so it's like, oh my gosh. But
No, I don't.
yeah, you do. You do.
I just laugh at you. Take 27.
Yeah. Wow. Really? Wow.